presentation. It's probably the, I told you I'm very passionate about player development. I'm probably just as passionate about fitting golf equipment. And I kind of started out doing it the old-fashioned way without launch monitors. And now it's turned into a little bit more of a complicated thing. If you let it get, you can get too complicated, you can split hairs. So basically, I'm going to tell you, I just try to get in the ballpark, especially with initial fit, and then tweak it from there. Because I don't want to be fooling around trying to, fine tune it. Customer gets a little anxious, I don't want to lose them. So the last presentation is fitting for the big three: driver, wedge, putter. Any idea why I call them the big three?
Personal clubs.
The scoring clubs. All right. So this is really important stuff. I think Dr. Rotella was the one that said, if you can hit driver, wedge, and putter well, it doesn't matter what you do with the other ones. So this was an article that I had written. This is in your packets. It's an article that I had written for the Met Golfer, and this was 2007, 2008, January 2008. So this was just, the goal here was just to give the customers an idea, just give them an idea of what, some basic things to look for when you're looking for a putter, looking at a wedge, looking at a driver. Okay, so I won't spend much time on this. It's in your packet. We'll kind of move to there's the second page of it. Okay, driver fitting. Factors to consider. You want to look at ball speed, and that's generally 1.5 times club head speed. Generally. Okay, launch angle. Preferred landing angle is 40 degrees. Now, before launch monitors and before we could assign numbers here, I would tell my student or my client that what I was looking for a trajectory if they were going to throw a football 50 yards. I'm not talking one of those Eli Manning throws that I saw last night, or just a 50-yard pass and then spin. Now, ideally, I think, and you see the numbers on the sheet. Actually, they're not on the sheet, they're on my information here to optimize. Ideally, you want a launch angle that's somewhere between 12 and 15. Okay, I'm just giving you ballpark figures. Ideally, what we're looking for is high launch, low spin. If you hit it on the top, above the equator, I think you've got the best chance of doing that. The thing that I run into most of the time with a driver fitting is people have the perception that if you have 8.5 in loft, you're going to hit it longer than you would 10.5 or 12. Okay? I found that, in general, slower club head speeds require more loft. Higher club head speeds require less loft. Okay? One of the things to consider in a driver fitting is tempo, how the club is loaded. Okay, you can see the transition. I'm on the quicker side. My club head speed has gone from, probably the last 10 years, I hate to admit it, it's gone from like 106, 107. I'm like 99, 98 right now. But I still, in my driver, I still use a pretty firm, heavy shaft because I load it quick. When I was younger, I had a longer swing. Constantly spent most of my time working on my swing trying to get it shorter, more compact. I don't have to worry about that now. It just kind of happened. Okay. Slower tempo, slower loads. Consider a lighter shaft and softer flex. Okay, that'll help to optimize launch conditions with the driver. Bar Shasko, a tip stiff shaft will encourage a lower launch and less spin, and a soft tip shaft will encourage a higher launch and more spin. So these are just some basic things right here. Now, if I don't have a launch monitor, if you don't have a launch monitor, if you can just kind of focus in this area, I think you'll do a pretty good job fitting a driver. Any questions here? Remember what I said, I've been out in many seminars, been part of the crowd, and privileged to present today to you, but I always look for things to take back. If there's some things that I can come away with. I put this in your packet. If you don't do anything else, talk a little bit about this, make copies of this, take a scissor, cut them in half, and give them to your teaching staff. This will go a long way. I think it helps your teaching, it'll help your understanding of the fitting process, and I think it shows the customer that you're really looking at all aspects of the equation. This is a good one. Wedge fitting. I just threw the lie chart in on this slide. This one's probably been all over the place. I think I first saw it with Henry Griffiths. Just some basics as far as lie angles. Now, I don't want to get into the Henry Griffiths things because, they have, you mention Henry Griffiths to somebody and they say, well, those are too long, too upright, too heavy. But if that's what you feel, and if that's what your belief is, the lie angles don't know the difference between that stuff and the way the clubs are made up. I think that's a pretty accurate guide right there to help you with determining lie angles. Now, when I'm looking for a lie angle when I'm doing a wedge fitting, it's a little different. Remember yesterday, talked about the story I had about Trevino in his clubs. He said he wanted he fit the middle set of his irons to what would be considered the proper lie angle. He was a little more upright with the longer irons because he said and Randy said he wanted to hit it high. He told me that he wanted to hit it, he never wanted to have a miss to the right of the target with the long irons. And the shorter irons, which include the wedges, he wanted on the flatter side because he never wanted those marks near the hosel for obvious reasons, and he never wanted to miss it with a wedge left. Okay. Pretty general information. I found this to be very, very interesting. And here's another opportunity here. I guess I'd ask the question, how many wedges do you sell a customer a year? Maybe one set every 5 or 6 years. I don't know. Some of my wedges, students in my wedges bags look like they could vote. They're old enough to vote. I mean, I don't understand it, but tour players, as a rule, will get 3 to 4 sets of wedges at the start of every season. Now, obviously, they're getting a lot of use, and the conditions, I think it also depends on the conditions you're playing in. If you're playing in sandy conditions, that's going to do a number there too. But the average lifespan of a wedge is 30 to 40 shots to keep the integrity of the face. 300 to 400 shots to keep the integrity. And so this would mean my average country club golfer should probably at least every 2 years replace their wedges. So I try to educate them with this right here. Definitely an opportunity to sell wedges.
Tom,
Oh, sorry.
you saying the average lifespan of the wedge is only 3 or 4 large buckets of balls?
No. 300 to 400 shots.
Golf
Golf
on
ball.
golf course. Okay.
Yeah. And, plus or minus, again, that's just a ballpark figure, plus or minus. If somebody's and you're hitting a lot of practice and a lot of sand shots, that's going to do more of a number on the face than if you were off the fairway. Okay, wedge fitting, sole anatomy. Okay, so the leading edge is where the bottom of the face and the sole meet. The sharper it is, the more the iron will dig. Sole width. The wider the sole, the easier it is to lower the center of gravity. That makes sense, right? A steep, slow swing will usually benefit from a wider sole. Put a plug in for Nike. I'm kind of a digger. And what I do with my wedges, I try to put it, I have a wide sole 60 and a narrow sole 54. So I figured with that combination right there, I can kind of cover all the situations, all the different conditions. Camber is how the sole is, the roundness to the sole. Heel to toe curvature increases playability, side hill lies, and front to back curvature helps reduce turf drag and deep rut. And bounce is the trailing edge as it rests, in respect to the leading edge. In a square hip position, the bigger the angle, the less the club will be. To get bounce across to my students, I just kind of ask, it's in the article there too, and I've used that forever. If you're playing on firm conditions, if you're playing, hard, compacted sand, I don't think you want a lot of bounce. And if you're playing soft conditions, kind of fluffy, soft turf, I think you want a little bit more bounce. If you're a digger, you want more bounce in general. And if you're a picker, if you're a digger, you want less bounce, more bounce. And if you're a digger, you want, let's back that up. Let me get a little water here. Regroup. If you dig, you want more bounce. And if you pick, you want less bounce. See, that's what, Randy, where were you? Randy would have tapped me or said something and told the story or whatever and got me out now. So I'm just out here, hanging out here to drive, but sorry about that. So wedge fitting. This is what I do. First of all, you remember what I said about looking at dirt marks and evaluate the equipment they have. That's the first thing. I like to kind of use a mid-bounce wedge to start out with. And, when you're out there, a lot of the wedges, I will use a live board and I will use some full swings, but I want to see what it looks like with a half swing or a three-quarter swing, because that's most of the conditions I'm using these clubs in. Okay? Look, if you go ahead and put some, I'll put that erasable marker on the face. I want to see where the contact is on the face. But if you, and I'll use some electrical tape on a board, making these swings right here. If the mark is on the trailing edge, less bounce, maybe a narrower sole. Center mark, football, mid-bounce, mid-sole is probably the recommendation there. And leading edge, mark, more bounce, wider sole. So that, just like I said, like I was trying to say before, here's the digger, here's the picker. What I try to do is, as far as the wedges go, I'll try to fit the most lofted wedge in the bag first, then backtrack to the pitching wedge, and then fill in between, gap fitting. I do use a program. This is really good with the launch monitor to kind of look at this, but I really want to see how the thing plays around the greens for me, because that's the best thing too. And I don't have ball in here too. I could let you have the big four and have ball in here, but as far as fitting for balls go, the stuff that I've read, it said that you could take all the golf balls that you have in your pro shop and take the one that's best suited for you and the one that's least suited for you, and there's maybe 5 or 6 yard difference. So when you go out to the oven, when you're getting fit for a golf ball out there, you go out there with wedges and you're out there, you want to see how it feels. And sound has something to do with it too, with the golf ball too. So you want to see what it feels like around the greens. That's when I fit for a golf ball, I'll fit around the green first and then kind of backtrack. Putting. This was an article that I did this year. I guess it was in 2012. At the end of 2012. I just, found a side saddle putter in the crowd. I'm gonna have him come up here and talk a little bit about that, because I came up with this just, when the USGA was threatening to take away the long putter, the anchored putter. This came out before that. I just said, what are my members, what are my students gonna do that play with the long putter? What are they gonna do as an alternative if they're not allowed to anchor it? And I'm in the same camp, and somebody in the USGA is in here, I'm sorry if I offend you, but I just think it's ridiculous. I think it's ridiculous that they took this away. We're trying to make the game more friendly. I worry about the students that wouldn't play if they couldn't anchor it. So what I did is I came up with this idea, and I found out it wasn't very original. We just came up with this idea, and I thought it kind of tackled a couple of things. Number one, in case of play, I went out and played a couple times with one of my members. I don't putt this way. I putt with a conventional length putter, but I went out with one of my members, a good player, and first of all, I looked at him and said, what the heck are you doing now? So I just want to try this. I said, I think this might be of some value to some of my students. And I had one of the best putting rounds doing it this way, and he says, wow. And this guy was a good player, and I actually got him to try it a little bit. But yeah, I just wanted to give them something, an alternative way to use their longer putter. Want to come up and talk about your method here? I think that would be great. It's Butch, right?
Yeah.
Butch told me, he came up to me at the break, and he said, hey, Tom, how long have you been teaching this side saddle putting? Move Randy here. And I said, well, I just been teaching it maybe about a year, and it's just selective, but he said, I've been putting this way for 32 years, so I'm all in. This is great for me. Which, should we give him a screen, or should I hold that for him?
I can probably talk
Okay.
about that. But
Okay.
don't hear me? Yeah. Hear me in the back?
Okay. So Butch got me at the break, and Butch said, I understand what you're doing here. I said, I just hold it a little different. So maybe you can tell me a little bit about that, Butch.
This grip with the lower right hand, I'm not crazy about for the simple reason that if you were to stand here and throw a ball, you don't throw it like this. You kind of throw it this way, right?
Like
if you put-
horseshoes? Or?
Yeah, anything, you just throw a ball. So if I put my right hand on, somewhat to that effect there, I kind of wrap my right forefinger around a little bit. Now that keeps me from manipulating the club face. 'Cause if you grip it any other way, which is unnatural, if I don't throw a ball like this, I don't throw a ball like this. So I'm trying to find a way so there's no manipulation. I got the yips when I was 26. And I couldn't hit the hole from 2 feet. It was 50% whether I hit the hole from 2 feet. And I played in a pro-am with a guy up in Reading who devised a putter specifically for this type of putting. And I played with him in a pro-am, didn't play very well. My normal putting round, 37, 38 putts. And he and I went out in the practice green after lunch that day, and I made the first 10 putts I hit. So I was sold on this particular stance. There's a lot of guys that use the putter a little bit longer, which I don't like for the simple reason. If you're too vertical here, you don't have enough room to swing the right hand back. If you're too bent over, I think it puts too much pressure on your back. I use a 46-inch putter. This is 48, so I'm going to hold it at 46. My left hand, I always put it on the top like this. I stand behind it. I've got a putter that has wings on it, and it's got two straight lines, and then I try to line the lines up exactly where I want it to go. Hold the putter on it like this, step into it, look at the hole, pull the trigger. And it takes no time. It's a much faster way to putt. Because it's faster, you have less time to think about things that can go wrong. You have less chance of actually yipping the putt.
But are you bracing your left arm, holding your left arm against your side?
I have been. You know, but they used to anchor this part of my arm here right to my side of my chest, right? And then that would just anchor, it just kind of pendulum the left hand, there's no problem there. Now all I gotta do is move it this far away from myself, and it's still the same motion. It's just, it's not anchored.
What's the rule, below the elbow can't be anchored? Because your underarm's
No.
touching your body on a regular
I thought the
stroke.
club
Is it
could-
the dual
Yeah,
club
that's
can't
the
be
club
anchored?
The club
They're gonna
itself
have a hard
can't be
time.
touching.
Really,
How are they gonna police this?
Well,
they're gonna
yeah.
have a hard time policing this whole situation.
I think
Because you're gonna have to take,
Yeah, I think
what happens if I've got a great big heavy sweatshirt on or something like that, all right? And I'm holding my arm this far away from my chest, and some guy comes up to you and says, "You anchored that." No, I didn't. Well, how do you prove it? I think USGA's gone in a big can of worms that they can't handle. That's my opinion. Yes.
As to what Tom said about, I think this is BS, I mean, that kind of puts you on one side. I had never realized this till I watched you, that if you're thinking about your students and helping them improve, you never have to look at the line from the side. And, you know, you're.
I'm using
behind your-
binocular vision, not
Binocular.
monocular vision.
Boom, they never get another, and I go over this with people every day. That, you know, you gotta get used to looking at it from the side as if you were standing behind it. Look how well you see the line when you're standing behind it. Now, get over there, you don't see, you can't see where you're going.
It's definitely distorted when you use a monocular vision.
I think so.
Yeah, that's, that was one of the things that I got out of it. And, you know, as I said, Butch, when I was talking to you before, I said, I had heard about some other people using, you know, side saddle, and I came up with this, and I just figured, I got the idea from watching, you know, some of my ladies come in here like this. You guys have anybody like this? They come in like this, and then they go, and then the putter moves. So it never, and then they gotta come back and do it
This is
again.
very simple, you just set that there, put that thumb in there, and then just walk in. Nothing has changed.
Right. And doesn't this, and for what you said there too, I said, and using binocular vision, it's quicker, pace of play, that's always an issue everywhere. I mean, I've never approached a putt so quickly and got it over with so quickly as when I was comfortable with this and feeling comfortable doing it. Now that I've got a new right-hand grip, I gotta try that, and I
Well,
gotta
it's
bring
just-
that home to my
I
students.
just don't like this because you don't throw anything this way. Or you don't throw anything this way.
And as I told Butch, when I first show this to people, the first thing that they do, and I don't know, again, the reason, you do this, they want to come in and do this. Is that again?
Well, I think part of the reason people do it this way here is because they think they can keep that face,
Maybe.
the hand square to the target line longer.
Yeah.
You actually can't. What'll happen is it's roll over this way.
Butch, thank you. Thanks for sharing that with us.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And he can do it successfully as well.
Now, is that right? You can vouch for that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Playing senior PGA Tour, man.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that with us, Butch. There's one of my things I'm taking home right there. Thank you. So putter fitting. Now, I got a lot of education from David Adele. You guys familiar with him? Really, a lot of stuff makes a lot of sense to me as far as putter fitting goes. And basically, there are three categories to putter fitting. At least I try to break them down into aim and path, and then speed control. So aim, path, speed control. Okay, and these are, you know, this goes into this is part right out of my reference. When I get my reference material, when I get a new student or get a new instructor, I say, just take a look at this. I think this might help you. You know, put this in your good pile here. Aim. This is how hosel affects aim. Offset versus S-shaped hosels. This is all for right-handed golfers now. There's a tendency to aim left if you have that type of looking putter. This has a lot to do with how you view it. Obviously, aim, you use your eyes to aim, right? Onset, or even just square, just straight like the old bullseye, that has a tendency, I think, to aim to, you could have a tendency to aim to the right. Triangle, yeah, I think it's not necessarily all the case. I just think it's Stricker and Aoki, upright, goes left, flat, or too flat will influence a little bit to the right. Head shape, this is pretty interesting. Circular, trailing edge. You have the half moon putters. There's a tendency to aim those to the right, and straight trailing edge. There's a tendency to aim to the left. Loft. You have more loft on the putter. There's a tendency that you want to just aim it a little bit left. And if you want to get somebody to move it back over to the right, just take a little bit of loft off. Again, the only factor I'm talking about here, this will affect a lot of things, but as far as aim is concerned, experiment with this. Lines on the putter. In general, if you have lines on the putter, it encourages or influences an aim left of target. Lines on the back of the blade, left. You have more influence on your lines. I saw the new Nike putter that came out. Jim Remy had one. The lines were on the bottom of the cavity, not on the top line. So I think that's a good place. You're going to have lines. No lines tend to influence aim to the right. Length, and I always equate length to lie angle. If it's a little longer, there's a tendency it's going to play a little bit more upright and influence left, even with a putter that doesn't have a whole lot of loft. Shorter tend to go to the right, and to influence aim to the right. Path. Now, Butch, path. Out of these three things here, this is my term, I guess, reverse radial, linear, and radial. What do you think Butch is?
Pretty linear.
It's probably one of the only ways that you can go, I guess you could go, if they allowed it, you could go linear this way, but they don't allow you to straddle the line. So I mean, I'm watching Butch up here, and it looks linear to me. Okay, so this wouldn't apply to Butch's style. Obviously, this is when you're on the side. But eyes outside the ball, if you get the eyes outside the ball, there's a tendency for the putter to work this way and this way, without manipulation now. I'm talking about without manipulation. Without manipulation, it'll go this way and this way. If I get too far to the inside, it goes this way, and then right over the ball, pretty much as close to linear as you're going to get from the side, without manipulation. Pure preference here. I mean, most of what I see, especially with my students, when they get in that choke zone, I see eyes getting outside. You know, they're really bearing down. I got to make this 3-footer. You know, get in here like that, and all kinds of crazy things break loose there. If I had a preference, and it's purely preference, I would take slightly inside or right in here.
Has there ever been a good putter who had their eyes on the other side of the ball?
I don't know the answer to that. I haven't seen one.
Sonny Bell Strauss.
Is that right?
And Philosopher also.
Yeah.
George Archer.
George Archer?
Oh.
Big guy, right? So there's a good chance that he was probably over there.
He was
Yeah.
pretty much over the ball.
Okay, yeah. But I'm just thinking preferences, that's my preference, but gosh, I mean, like I said, Stricker and Aoki. When I tell Aoki to change the way he putts, he was a darn good putter. I think that was one of those Jim Furyk cases that I talked about yesterday with Jerry Pedman. Leave him alone. This looks pretty darn good. He makes a lot. Same with Stricker. Yes.
Do you ever cover, I've heard people argue for and against eye dominance. Do you care at all about that? And some people say it doesn't really matter.
I think it matters. I'd like to find out if they're right or left eye dominant, but when it comes right down to it, I want to see where to see how they see it. I can probably tell a little bit by, tell a lot by the way they set up to it. But eye dominance, it's gotta be, I'm right-handed, but I'm left eye dominant. So, I do some things I play pool left-handed, shoot a gun left-handed.
So the side saddle, Tom, didn't bother you at all being left eye with a right-handed
No,
player?
you know what, it's amazing, it doesn't, I would tell you,
Yeah.
and Butch's comment on this, I think the way Butch goes about it, I think it matters the least if you're right eye or left dominant, it's how you see it, and he's using binocular vision, and two are better than one. Two effectively, eyes this way, are better than one ineffectively. This is distorted from the side.
Butch, did you do any training where you put a string down or a putt board and checked your aim?
You can usually do it if you've got a putter with some lines on it, you can usually set everything up fairly square.
What I use, Steve, is I've got one of those, guy from the Slazenger fitting days, I've got the laser, which I guess is Rick,
Yeah.
is that Rick Wright?
Yeah.
Rick Wright's got a laser too, right? Correct?
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, Rick Wright's got some really good stuff on aiming.
I'd just be interested if that helped your tendency.
And this is not an ad for Rick Wright, but he's got a new laser out. The laser that I use with the Slazenger fitting system, it didn't work very well outside. It was great inside. But the new one that Rick's got, I think is clear as can be outside. So,
Laser works fine with Slazenger if you'll put a 2x4 or 4x4 on the other side so your laser can shoot onto the board.
yeah, you put up like a backstop
Back and stop.
with a little circle there that represents the hole.
Just put it right behind the hole.
Yeah. Now, while we're talking about, we kind of got back on aim a little bit. The way it was explained to me by a really smart guy, sports psychologist, Pete Solana in our area. He originally worked with the St. John's team. He worked with Keegan Bradley. And I went to see Pete one time when I was having some problems putting. And Pete said to me, do you putt on the line? Do you try to get the ball to roll on the line? Or do you putt toward an area? I said, well, chalk lines, I've always used the line. I said, you don't have to. He said, the width of the hole is the width of a roll of toilet paper. And so he takes out the toilet paper, now it's, oh geez, any members around, what's going on? So he takes it and he rolls it out, and we're doing like about a 10-footer, he rolls it out. He says, to make this putt, he said, all you have to do is just roll it on that roll of toilet paper. As long as it stays within that corridor, you're fine. So that was huge right there. I mean, that took the pressure right off. I mean, I wasn't stressing anymore. I said, geez, all I have to do is that. One of the things when I teach putting is I pace off my putts. I figure, getting off into teaching a little bit, but this is a teaching and coaching center, right, Bill? And you can't separate the two, right? There's the fitting and the instruction. When I teach putting, I pace off my putts, not when it's my turn to putt, but I go up on the green, I fix my ball mark, and I'll pace. And I'll go up. Each one of my paces I equate to 3 feet, and I do it for a number of reasons. Number one, it gives me a yardage. I get yardages everywhere else on the golf course. Why wouldn't I have any on the green? Number two, when I'm pacing, when I'm walking, I use my feet as sensors. I can feel the little subtleties of the green, up, down, side, hill, whatever. Number three, it gets me on the other side of the hole. And there is absolutely nothing scientific about what I'm going to tell you here. At least, not to my knowledge. I had this guy at the club, God rest his soul, his name is Captain Lyle Ramsey. He won the club championship probably 10 times. Great player. One of the best putters I've ever seen in my life. And I think where he was the best was reading greens. So I said to him one day, I said, Captain, I get out on the green, and how many of you get out there, or your students get out there, and you're behind the ball, look into the hole, and you get a totally different read than from behind the ball looking for the hole hole looking back to the ball. And I said, when you get conflicting reads there, what do you go with? He said, always go with from behind the hole looking back to the ball. And I said, can you tell me why? I said, no, just do. And so that was good enough for me. I never saw anybody putt any better than this guy on our game. So I went with that. The other reason why I pace off my putts, and it goes along the roll of toilet paper, I have some students that really, and probably do too, that really struggle with 3 and 4 putts. Okay? So I have what I call a 10% rule. If I've got a 20 footer, I'll pace it off and I'll just picture 10% of the total distance, a circle around the hole. So a 10% of 20 is, I'm not that smart, but I know it's 2 feet. So I picture a 2-foot circle around the hole. And I'm just trying to get, especially that person that's really struggling with distance control, I'm just trying to get them to get it in that circle. And I feel confident that if they can get in the circle, number one, they got a chance of making the putt. Number two, would not struggle with that 2-footer, as opposed to knocking it way back. Now, I start out with that philosophy, and then as we get more advanced and we get better at that, then I tell them to cut the circle in half. So, in other words, if this is a circle right here, put the line there, and I want it on the back. If the ball doesn't go in the hole, I want it in the back side of the circle. Because at least that had a chance to go in. And the way it was explained to me is on the front part of the circle, if you leave it short, the ball goes in doesn't go in 99.9% of the time. And I said, well, where's that 0.1%? They said, well, if the ball gets in the front, if it's short and a gust of wind comes up and blows it in. And it's probably less than that 0.1. But, so that's a little bit of my putting philosophy. And I think, that 10% rule, pacing off the putts, I'll use the toilet paper rule for better players. I think it just takes the heat off. It just gets you a little bit more relaxed. And if you're relaxed, I think you got a better chance of pulling off the shot you're trying to attempt. Speed control. Experiment here. This is where I really experiment. Okay. Head weight. For faster greens, I recommend heavier head weight. Now, when I first heard this, it was like, all right, this doesn't make any sense. Faster greens, heavier. Heavier, you're not going to move as fast. I think you're going to be steadier on the shorter strokes where we tend to get a little jumpy. Butch, on your putter, heavy, light?
Very heavy.
Very heavy. Okay.
500 grams.
Okay, so that's up there. I think, like 360, 365 is kind of normal gram weight for putters, but on the longer putters, definitely to steady. And I think that's the reason why I'll go heavier here, is to just keep it a little steadier on those really quick greens. Slow greens, lighter, I think, maybe be able to move it a little bit faster. I don't know, to compensate for the slow. Shaft flex. If you have a softer flex, I mean, how many guys think about, or gals think about shaft flex in a putter, right? Softer gets the head to feel a little heavier, and stiffer gets the head feeling a little lighter. So this is all feel stuff, and experiment with this stuff. I don't think anything's written in stone here. Counterweighting, this is like the biggest thing going right now. Counterweighting. If you have more of weight in the top of the club here, it's going to give, obviously, a counterweight. It's going to take the percentage of the weight distribution out of the head, so it's going to give you a little lighter feel. And less counterweighting, you're going to feel heavier head weight. Okay, this is the big thing, and I'll be the first to tell you, I don't know the science behind this, and if somebody's out there and they want to share that with me, it'd be another thing, a great thing for me to take with me. But I just experiment with this, and I've tried to get answers from people that I think are pretty smart in this area, and they just say, buy a kit from 10 to 50 grams and just experiment putting them in there. I know the counterweighting, at least the way it was explained to me, the counterweighting, if you're holding it at the end, it's not going to be as effective or have as much of an effect as if you, you know, TaylorMade's got the putter, one of the spiders, I guess, and I think you choke down quite a bit on it, so the counterweight is here. Kind of like what we saw with Orange Whip yesterday, that counterweight on the end. Yes?
With that heavy long legs, which is the counterweight
That's
putter, if you use it, it's like 395-degree head weight, but if you only.
395 grams?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's about an extra 40 grams.
Okay.
But if you only choke up on it like an inch, it actually is heavier. It would be heavier, and if you actually rip from the end, it is quite a bit heavier. So the swing weight is actually heavier.
Okay.
So you can use those that way as well.
Okay.
If anybody's out there
Yeah.
that wants to use a heavier putter, because actually I use one of those on just to use faster greens, and it is heavier because it's 395. It's about an extra 40 grams versus their guts or whatever. And if you only choke it over like 1 inch, you can adjust that and end up with a heavier putter using one of the counterbalance putters.
Okay. That's good. I mean, you experiment a little bit with that right now, are you?
And I end up using the 35-inch one and not choking up on it 2 inches and using it as a 395 gram heavier, and just let it swing.
No. Here, I'm talking, when I talk counterweighting, I'm just addressing, and I probably should address total weight. Right. If you take this club and you add more weight here, it's gonna be a heavier total weight club too.
Right.
I mean, that's just common sense. So I was just talking the relationship here with heavyweight, but that's interesting. I wanna talk to you more about that.
But you can make the counterweight, go then and use it in a way to make your other heavy if you wanted to.
Now, I guess you can do that too with your regular, with your iron set and your woods and stuff. I did experiment with that. One of the manufacturers was doing that, but I think it's all experimental. At least with me, it's more of a feel thing, I think. Yes.
That's, I work for a company called Turlock, and that's what we do. And
Don't enlighten me.
there's a couple things, you know, as far as putter balancing goes and counterweighting, you can put a heavier counterweight in the back end of the grip to raise the balance point of the club higher. But we also use internal shaft weights, which Adele uses when he does his club fitting. I talked to David, and he does 60 to 70% of his putter optimizations are with internal shaft weights. And what that does is he goes further down, which delays the release of the putter. So there's different ways to change the MOI of the putter and also.
Is there, I'm always looking for charts and scientific, and I can't seem to get them from anybody. Is it a field thing, the way that I look at it, or?
It's a feel thing, and it's also more of a consistent stroke from time to time. You see, you know, your
Right.
higher handicap players that don't putt very well, if you put more weight around their hands, it's going to slow them down. Number one, it's going to help them keep it on a better path.
You know, I use tour tempo for some students. Is everybody familiar with that, with the tone? And invariably, when on the full swing, I'll get people to, they'll kind of figure out where they're at as far as frames, like 33, 11 or whatever, try to match it up with the video, count the frames, and then get them going on it. And it's like, invariably with the full swing, which is a 3-to-1 ratio, oh my God, this is so fast. That's the reaction I get from the student. When I use short game, which the relationship is 2-to-1, oh my God, this is slow. This is so slow. It's amazing. Across the board, that's what I get. So, more of this on short game stuff, on chips and pitches and putts, and maybe a little bit too much of this on to max out. Yes.
On the heavier putter on faster greens, if you had a 4-footer left edge putt, and you had a heavy putter, is it your tendency to deaccelerate? So I'm thinking that if you had a lighter putter, you could commit to the line with a shorter stroke and be more assertive in your stroke.
Years ago, and this really good player at Seminole, a guy named John Birmingham, and he had this putter that I think Cobra put out called the Anvil. It was real. This thing was so heavy, And we had really fast greens at Seminole, and, I saw him putt with it, and he couldn't putt with it. I just think he used it to steady himself. It was easier to steady something that was heavier than lighter. He was waving
You're
around.
talking about nerves.
What's that?
You're talking about nerves.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's where, that's where I go here. And you're talking about speed control. I haven't seen, if on that 4-footer, I get that heavy putter here, or the heavy putter too, the actual heavy putter.
But don't you have to play more break with the heavy putter?
Depends on your pace. Depends on your speed.
Assuming everybody's gonna go by the hole a foot, you're gonna have to back off on a heavy putter, where a lighter putter, you can be assertive. With a shorter stroke, you still get so fast.
Okay. I would take the heavy putter on a 4-foot putt and probably not take it back as far, and then go through, which that's the way I look at it. Yes?
What are your thoughts on recoil?
Try not to recoil. I don't mean.
Nicholas had one.
Yeah. I gotta be honest with you, I don't see it. I never see that, and I don't, so as a result, I don't address it. So if there's somebody that can comment to recall, that would tell me a little bit about it. Yes?
Not even about recall, but do you use the sand machine?
I have the Tommy, the small one. Unfortunately, I don't use it enough because I don't have a studio at the club. They've been promising me a studio in Teachville for 27 years. New greens and irrigation system and all that stuff gets in the way, so. I was talking to someone earlier, we were talking about, sometimes you can use that little application that the Ping has that you use on your iPhone. I don't know, I think that might disrupt what you're doing a little bit, to have something on the shaft blade. It's like you're putting weight midway through the shaft. So, I think all that stuff's good. I think as far as putting and closing, if you're looking for perfection, I think you're putting way too much pressure on yourself. And I tell all my students that it's nice to have a goal of perfection, but it's unattainable. And Hogan, I'm very fortunate, I'll end on this. Very fortunate to be able to watch Mr. Hogan hit balls for 2 weeks a year for like 5 years. And he said to me one day, I remember I watched him play on Monday. One of my fellow workers played with him, and he was nervous as could be out there. And he was, and I just watched him play. In his mid-60s at Seminole, he hit, on a windy day, he hit 16 greens out of 18. And the 2 that he missed were this far off. And it was the most amazing ball striking round that I had ever seen. And I said, Mr. Hogan, hit it pretty good today. He said, I only hit, 3 shots the way I planned, but, if the best player in the world, says he can't be perfect, us mere mortals, I don't think we have a shot. But it's nice to have that goal and to work toward that, but if you're realistic about it, you're not going to be perfect. And I think that takes the pressure off too. So sometimes when we get into launch monitors, and I was telling Bill this before too, is when I use the launch monitor, I have a techno geek assistant, and he's kind of running the numbers, and I'm asking him. I'm watching ball flight, and I'm working with a student, and I'm asking him once in a while. And sometimes I don't even want to see the numbers, but he handles all that, and he understands. I have to be the first to tell you, he understands it a lot more than I do. So I'm kind of the old-fashioned guy watching ball flight and working with the student, one-on-one, and for that relationship, and then I'm getting numbers fed to me. So I think sometimes that's why I try to hide the numbers from the student too. I think if you look at the numbers and you just overanalyze those, you get all bound up. I just want to say it was a real pleasure for me an honor and a privilege to speak in front of you. I've learned a lot from talking to a lot of you, and hopefully we can carry this over to maybe the lunch, and we can chat a little bit. If you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer. By no means do I have all the answers, and I'm but I'm constantly looking for them. So I really enjoyed the participation, your attention, and I really enjoyed, and thank you for inviting me out here. It's all my pleasure's all mine.
Well, Tom, it was definitely a pleasure and a privilege having you here to enlighten our Southern California section members for the last day and a half, and we look forward to speaking with you some more later today, and safe travels back east when you do head out of here. As we mentioned yesterday, FlightScope is one of our supporting sponsors of our teaching summits, and in addition to that, they have been kind enough to send David Nell out all the way from Orlando to speak to us on the technology of teaching. David is is an application specialist with FlightScope, and it kind of ties in perfectly to what we've been discussing the last couple days, and will give us a little bit more insight into what actually happens to the golf ball and the golf club, etc. So we're getting him mic'd up and getting his computer set up. Take just a minute, so please stay in your seats, and we will introduce shortly David Nell. David, welcome.
Is it on? Thank you, Bill. Thanks for having us here. It's an honor for us at FlightScope to be part of your section, educational events, and hopefully we can build on this partnership. So today I'm just going to talk a little bit about the technology in teaching. When I started with FlightScope 5 years ago, 90% of our sales were to OEMs and club fitters, and the last 2 years that actually just reversed. So 90% of the FlightScopes that we sell today are to teachers and to individuals that use it in teaching and training. Right, so just a little bit about the technology. It's called phased array Doppler radar. And basically what it is, it consists of an accelerator that generates microwave signals. Now, it will generate about 10.5 billion microwaves per second. The antenna will radiate the signal, and any moving object in that beam will reflect the signal back, and that is how we can get distance and movement at any point in time on that movement. But since we do have multiple receivers, and that's where the phased array comes from, we can actually determine in three dimensions exactly where in space and time that moving object is. A little bit about the history of phased array Doppler. It's very prominent in the defense industry. It was first used by the U.S. Navy in World War II to conduct night missions. We started off in the military, in the defense industry as well, since '91, and we're still supplying 24 countries to that with Doppler radars. We, however, saw that since it can track any moving object, there's quite a few other applications that we can develop it for. And golf is one of those, and we started with that in '01. Just to kind of show you how powerful phased array Doppler is. The U.S. Missile Defense Agency uses a phased array Doppler radar. It's called SBX. And it is so powerful that if you sling a baseball from another continent into space, it will actually tell you whether it's a fastball, slider, or curveball. So it's pretty powerful. Right. So how would you use 3D Doppler radar in golf? I would see 4 very important applications for it. Would be club fitting, teaching, benchmarking your students, and also for students to train on. So let's start off with club fitting, and I think every teacher should be able to club fit. So what are the club fitting parameters that's unique to radar that could help you make a better fit, or do a better fit? First off is centeredness of impact. We have to hit the sweet spot. When you can get somebody to hit the sweet spot, you are going to change their golf immediately. Swing Labs, Sky Golf, actually conducted a study, and they said that 13% of golfers can hit the sweet spot on a consistent basis. Yesterday I had 65 amateurs on the radar, and actually only 5 were able to hit the sweet spot consistently with their driver. Right, next up, club loft and lie angle. I think every teacher should have a loft and lie machine. I think before you start with the students, check that equipment, make sure that those lie angles are not the cause of a face angle that could be off. Also, making sure that the gaps in the bag are consistent and that the lofts actually help them to do that. Next up, we have launch conditions. Right, so we have ball flight that we want to influence with our club fit. And first off, ball speed, a very important parameter. How do we improve ball speed? That is by improving club head speed. Then we also have the dynamic loft and angle of attack, which is, to me, is the 2 most important club fitting parameters. And that will change your launch angle, your spin rate, and also your landing angle of the golf ball. Right, so let's first start off with smash factor. Smash factor is a very nice little equation. It's a speed equation, ball speed divided by club head speed. It is the energy transfer ratio between club and ball. So the optimal smash factor for a driver is 1.50. So for every mile an hour club head speed that you generate, you should be able to attain at least 1.5 miles an hour ball speed if you hit it in the sweet spot. It could be slightly higher if you do play a very low lofted driver, so you minimize the vertical gear effect, or if you do happen to find a hot face. Right, now that optimal smash factor do become lower for different clubs. So as you move down the bag, that optimal smash factor will drop due to the fact that you are creating more loft. So when the golf ball collides with the club face, it's going to compress, it's going to slide, and it starts rolling up. The more that happens, the more energy is lost due to that creation of launch and spin. Right, so also the optimal smash factor, like I said, is dependent on a few things like the loft, the spin loft of the club at impact, and also the club mass and the ball mass. So if you can increase your club mass and you can attain the same swing speed, you will get a higher smash factor, you will get higher ball speed. But typically when you change the weight of the club by 2 or 3 grams, you will see that the players' swing speed do tend to lower a little bit. Ball mass, again, you'll find sometimes you can see a smash factor of 148 with an iron. If it's a range ball, it's probably that golf ball weighs about 4 or 5 grams less. Right, so this is just a smash factor guideline. I will have this PDF available for anybody that's interested. I'll give it to Bill, and you can give it to anybody interested. Right, so we can see with the driver we've got 1.50, and it goes down the bag until we get down to the lob wedge of about 1.05. Now that smash factor guideline, the only difference, if you look at the pros, they tend to, with the irons, get a little bit of a lowest optimal smash factor. And that is because they tend to play weaker lofts than the average golfer. So the average golfer has a little bit of a stronger loft in his irons, thus he's going to create less spin, and that's a little bit more ball speed for that given swing speed. Right, so what does missing the sweet spot do for a player? Right, so we can see that there's a few speeds on there. The club rotation will give you about 12 to 14 miles an hour difference in the toe and the heel speed, as much as 21, 22 miles an hour. And You can see if you hit the sweet spot dead in the center, you will get 150 mile an hour ball speed for that club head speed. If you move up towards the top, you can see we can lose up to 500 RPMs of spin, and we can gain 2.5 degrees of launch. It will drop about a mile an hour in ball speed. So if you do, and some pros are very good at doing this, if you can control your impact towards the top of the face, you will be able to attain with that negative angle of attack, or same swing, you'll be able to attain that secret to distance, and that is high launch, low spin. But the opposite is true when you move down towards the bottom. So you'll see that even though the club head speed will increase a little bit, because the biggest job of the shaft is to deliver the club where the toe moves faster than the heel and the bottom moves faster than the top, to add loft and to close the face. Right, and that rotation causes one of the reasons why we have the toe traveling faster than the heel, and also the bottom will travel a little bit faster than the top. Right, so, but we can see that we drop a bunch of ball speed at the bottom, and also introduce a lot more spin, and we are going to get a lower launch as well due to that twisting of the club. And this is all, these are ballpark figures. Depends on the torque on the shaft, the speed of the player, the way the shaft flex. But it gives you an idea of top of the face, high launch, low spin, which is good. Bottom of the face, you will lose some launch and you will gain spin. Right, so let's have a look at the effect of an off-center hit, right, and why it's important to be able to hit the sweet spot. All right, you can see what we did on the top of the face and the bottom of the face. So let's look at the what is the tendency of a amateur golfer? So typical higher handicaps do impact it towards the bottom, closer to the heel. All right, so let's have a look at a 90 mile an hour swing. And we'll look at the sweet spot versus the bottom heel. So on the sweet spot, with its 1.5 smash factor, we should be able to attain a 135 mile an hour ball speed. All right. If we do that, we've got a good launch angle of, say, 15.3 degrees, which is good for that kind of ball speed. 2,900 RPM spin gives us a 217 carry and a 225 total distance. If we move that impact position down towards the bottom heel, we'll see that we're losing quite a bit of ball speed. Smash factor will obviously drop, so it's a great way for you to kind of see typical amateurs have lower smash factors because they do impact the club in the slow moving part of the face, which is towards the heel. Right, we dropped our launch angle to 11.3 and we've gained quite a bit of spin, 37.13. So towards the heel, the spin will actually climb a little bit higher as well. That drops us down to 186 carry and 195 total. So that's a 30-yard loss. But if you do have your student and he comes in and you put up a little bit of spray on the face and you see that he's hitting it off the sweet spot, the first thing you can do, whether it's changing his clubs or working on the posture or the swing, if you can get him to the sweet spot, immediately he will gain a lot of distance, and also the ball would do what he intends it to do with his impact positions. Right, optimizing launch conditions. Right, so we said carry distance is ball speed, is a result of ball speed, launch angle, and spin. Right, so the only way that we can increase the ball speed, assuming you hit the sweet spot, is to gain a higher club head speed. So club head speed is a great parameter to focus on when you are working on swing mechanics, flexibility, strength, maybe changing. Nike comes out with a new club that's 20 grams lighter. That will definitely gain club head speed. Also, better ball compression, do a ball fitting. So the hard golf ball might not be suited to the 90 mile an hour club head speed. Maybe we can go for something a little softer. So the ball compression, measuring ball compression for a player, fitting a player to ball compression, the smash factor is pretty much the best parameter to use for that, and also to find the sweet spot. So, using spray is really effective and probably the best way to do it, but if you're going to hit 20 shots, putting spray every time is a little bit of a workout. Right, vertical launch and total spin. Right, so now the launch angle will fall somewhere between the plane of our angle of attack and our dynamic loft. So if our dynamic loft is going to be our effective loft at impact, so the static loft of the club at address, the way that you approach the golf ball, the way the shaft flex, the way that you de-loft the club forward pressing with your hands, that changes that static loft to the dynamic loft at impact. Right, and that dynamic loft is the most important parameter that will influence how your golf ball starts in its initial trajectory relative to your tee. Right, so the golf ball will start somewhere between your angle of attack and your dynamic loft. Right, now as the spin loft gets lower, so when you have a driver, you're actually going to see that initial launch is going to be closer to our dynamic loft. As we increase the spin loft, so when we get down to our wedges, we're pretty much there, so about 60-40%. But the dynamic loft will always influence that initial trajectory. Right, now, the difference between the angle of attack and the dynamic loft, with friction, will cause the golf ball to spin. So that will cause that vertical gear effect when the ball rolls up the face. So friction is very important when it comes to spin generation. So that's why you want to make sure when somebody's hitting irons on the range that they keep those grooves clean. Also, from a ball fitting standpoint, the softer cover will definitely cause more friction between the club and the ball. And again, it's a great way to explain to your students as well what happens when they're in the rough. When they do have grass or swell coming in between the grooves and the ball, that will create less friction, and that's where we're getting higher launch and lower spin, and that's that flyer condition. Right, so how do we decrease the spin? If we're hitting a driver, we want to attain lower spin. We are going to try to hit up on the golf ball and de-loft the club to give us less of a spin loft. If we're hitting wedges into a green, we really want them to stick. We're going to swing a little bit steeper, maybe open the face slightly, or use a weaker loft to create more spin. Right, but the friction is very important, especially when you do lose compression, as with pitch shots. You'll see that stays. You'll see that you'll need, if you look at tour players, they're very good at making the golf ball spin with half shots, and that's just because their contact is absolutely perfect every single time. Right, so let's have a look at spin loft and spin. Right, so a simplified version of spin loft is the difference between dynamic loft and angle of attack. So it's actually the difference between the three-dimensional movement of the club at impact and the three-dimensional orientation of the club head at the top, which is our dynamic loft and face angle. So 1 degree change in spin loft is going to change the spin how much? And we can see with a driver, 80 miles an hour, 184. As we increase it up to 100 miles an hour, we're getting to 230 RPM. So with tour pros that attain, or amateurs that attain a lot of speed, you want to make sure that their spin loft is a little lower. They need less loft than the amateur because they're going to create more spin for every degree, just due to the fact that they have more compression. The golf ball's going to react to that friction more. With irons, we're introducing grooves to the equation, so that increases friction again, and we can see that at 90 miles an hour, we're creating about 60 RPMs of spin for every degree more than with a driver. Right, another very important fitting parameter is the vertical descent angle, the landing angle of the golf ball. So that is tracked, and that is the angle of the golf ball landing relative to the ground. And that is affected by the ball speed, the spin rate, and also the launch angle. What affects it the most? Spin will affect it the most. So a lot of people ask, so what is the perfect launch or spin rate for my player? Well, you're going to check. It all depends on the speed, but the landing angle is a great parameter to focus on. All right, so we're going to look at what are those perfect numbers? What are those good ranges for amateurs? Right, so for an amateur, the optimal ball descent angle with a driver would be between 30 and 35 degrees. Why? Because they typically play on softer fairways. They need more roll. They need the distance. All right, so we want to make sure that 30, 35 degrees calls for a pretty high launch. You've got to remember you have to carry the ball. The ball will lose a lot more energy due to friction with the ground than it does due to drag in the air. If you hit a 200-yard shot, that golf ball is going to lose 50% of its speed in 200 yards. When it hits the ground, it loses the other 50% in about 10 to 15 yards. Right. So for amateurs, 30 to 35 degrees. For pros, they can, and better players, they can get up, they'll have a little bit of a higher descent angle, 35, 40 degrees, because there's so much speed involved. When you want a pro to get down to 30, 35 degrees, they're going to have to spin the ball at very low numbers. Right, but they do play harder fairways. They typically, don't need the golf ball to roll 30 yards into the rough when they hit the middle of the fairway. So control is, more important than the distance. All right, so and as I said, they create more lift for the same amount of spin than with amateurs. Right, with irons, you want to be able to make sure that your golf ball descends at a steep enough angle to where you can hold a firmer green or attack tight pin positions. Right now, for amateurs, you also want to be able to give them distance with an iron. Right, so typically, because their irons are stronger as well, you are going to look at a 45 to 55 degree optimal descent angle with your iron. Right, pros, a little steeper, just due to the fact that they do have firmer greens and tighter pin positions. You will look at a little bit of a steeper number, 50 to 60. So scientifically, you would want a 6 iron to drop at 55 degrees, which is pretty much impossible with today's clubs, but kind of gives you an idea. You do want that landing steepness in the landing angle. So this is optimal descent angle is a great parameter when you do fit, so that you know where your launch and spin should be. Right, so let's have a look at an example. So this is typical amateur golfer, and let's assume that we got him into the sweet spot. Swing speed's 90 miles an hour. That gives us 135 ball speed. Dynamic loft at 12 degrees. Angle of attack at -2, so dynamic loft at 12, angle of attack slightly low, so the golf ball is going to launch at 9.2 degrees. The spin loft will be 14 degrees, which gives us 2898 RPMs of spin, and that descent angle will be 26.5. So that result is going to give us 202 yards of carry. So what am I going to do as a teacher to give my player more distance? Right. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get that angle of attack nice and positive. So we're going to go from -2, and I'm going to use that first. So we're going to go from -2, we're going to go to +5. Now you can see the dynamic loft. As you change the angle of attack, the dynamic loft will change the exact same amount up as well, or in the same direction, and the spin loft will stay the same. So now we actually have 19 degrees on the dynamic loft now. So since we've changed the angle of attack by 7 degrees, we've gone from 12 degrees to 19 degrees for the dynamic loft, but our spin loft will stay the same at 14 degrees. So we're now launching the golf ball very close to about 16, 17 degrees with 3,000 RPMs of spin, which is not going to be optimal. So what we're going to do now is we're going to actually get the golf ball, the dynamic loft, a little closer to the angle of attack to get that spin loft a little closer, but we're still going to have that nice launch. So we're going to, and however you do it, by working on somebody's forward press with the driver or with the club, or just putting him in a stiffer shaft, higher bend profile, or just a lower static loft on the head. Right, so that's where I'm going to knock off. So I'm going to create the launch angle with my positive angle of attack, and I'm going to knock off the spin with my dynamic loft. Right, and that gets us 2484 with a 34.7 degree descent angle, and that will get us 18 yards, or about 16 yards more carry distance. So we're still with ample roll because our descent angle is still in a very good number there, 34.7 degrees. Right, so let's have a look. Next up, let's have a look at some teaching parameters, some of the parameters that you will find useful in teaching. So the first thing that we want to focus on is ball flight. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to influence the ball flight in a more positive way. So the first thing, let's look at what ball flight consists of. Ball flight consists of the ball speed, and the parameters that we're going to focus on will be club speed and smash factor. Then the initial trajectory of the golf ball, so where it starts vertically and horizontally. So that's the vertical launch angle, the horizontal launch angle. On the vertical launch angle, we'll focus on the dynamic loft and the angle of attack. And then the horizontal launch angle, the launch direction of the golf ball relative to your target will be influenced by face and club path. Right, and then also the two spin vectors, spin rate and the spin axis. The two parameters is their spin loft that will change our spin or backspin, and then the face to path parameter that will influence our spin loft. Right, so what I've seen for some of the good teachers that uses the radar in their teaching, in their lessons, face angle, club path, spin axis, and the lateral landing of the target line seems to be something that everybody focuses on to improve somebody's game. Right. So when you can control face and path, you've got half the battle with one. The other half is putting it into the hole. Right. So let's look at horizontal launch and spin axis. All right, so again, we had the angle of attack, and we have the dynamic loft that influenced our spin rate and our launch angle. Now I'm just going to move this whole plane to a horizontal movement, and now we've got that dynamic loft, which would indicate our face angle, and the angle of attack that would indicate our club path. So it's important to note that face angle, dynamic loft is the same thing, just viewed in two different planes. And just as much is the club path the exact same thing as angle of attack, just viewed on two different planes. Right. So the difference between the face and path. Well, let's have a look at the initial trajectory. So the face, again, will dictate where that golf ball starts in the same ratios as what we have with the dynamic loft and the angle of attack. So when you do have a low lofted club, the face angle will dictate that initial trajectory by 80%, 80 to 85%. As you add more loft, it becomes less. Right, so when you get to your wedges, the face will play much less of an influence, but it will still have the majority influence on where that golf ball starts. Then the difference between the face and the path, very importantly, will tilt our spin axis, and that is how we control our ball flight. Right, so you can see that that spin axis will tilt perpendicular to that wedge shape between the face and the path. Right, so the more spin loft we have, the less that spin axis will tilt for that given delta between face and path. The less spin loft with the driver, now we can see the spin axis actually tilts even more for that every degree of delta between the face and the path. So again, this is a very important, thing to keep in mind as well. When you do work with the player, is if you want distance, you want to create less spin loft. But with less spin loft comes more difficulty in controlling your ball flight. So the more spin loft you create, the easier it will be to hit the golf ball straight, because more spin loft creates more vertical gear effect, and thus the more vertical gear effect you have in the club face, the less horizontal gear effect will be introduced. Right, so if you have a player with a lot of speed, a younger player that hits the ball a long way, sometimes it's even better to give him a little bit more spin loft to get him to hit the ball straighter. Whereas, your older member that doesn't hit the ball that far, is not going to miss the fairway that easy, so he's going to gain more from distance, so you might want to give him a little lower spin loft. So something that you can play around with and pretty easy to change. Right, so just have a look at the spin axis tilt. Like I said, the less spin loft you have, the more the spin axis tilt for every degree difference between face and path. So you can see, people think that long driving is all about power, but with the equipment setup that those guys use, the golf ball spin axis tilts tremendously for even missing the sweet spot. That thing goes all over the show. Right, and as you go down, as you add spin loft to your clubs, it becomes easier to hit the golf ball straight. So you can see with 40 degree, we went from 6 degree with a typical driver to 1.5 degrees. So the driver will actually tilt the spin axis 4 times as much as a wedge would. Right, now, since we're going to focus on face and path, what do we need that face and path to be, to hit the golf ball? So there's basically 3 shots that we want to hit at golf when it comes to direction. We want to hit a draw, or a right to left ball fly back to the target line, or a fade, or we want to hit a straight shot. All right, so it's pretty easy. When you have a straight shot, you want to make sure that your COGs line up. So you want to make sure that your face and your path lines up, because that's going to create no spin axis tilt. So due to the face being as close to 0 as possible, you're going to launch the golf ball straight, and because there's no delta between face and path, the spin axis won't tilt. But what happens when we want to hit a draw or a fade? So let's focus on a draw. To hit a draw, your path needs to be to the right of the target for the right-handed golfer. Right, so we'll think of a right-handed golfer. So it has to be right. There's no other way to hit a draw back to the target line. Right, but we want to make sure if we hit the golf ball with a draw back to the target line, it needs to launch to the right of the target. So both path and face needs to be right of the target line. But we always want to make sure, because we want that spin axis to tilt back to the left, to give us that draw, we always want to make sure that if this is our target line, that our face dissects the plane of path and the target line. Face always has to be between those 2 parameters. Now, when you do get amateur golfers, typically they'll maybe have a path that's to the left of the target and a face that's to the right. So you're going to work on getting those 2 closer together in the same direction at least. Right, so it could either be face or it could be path, depends on what the player responds to the best or has the best ability to control. Right, so what is that ratio that we're looking for on face and path? As a general guideline, when you are hitting, maybe hybrids, just to mid-irons, we're looking at a ratio of about, face needs to be half of that path. Right, so if your path is 5 degrees, you want your face at about 2.5 degrees. Right, when we do have a driver, we want to make sure that our face is closer to the path, because remember, that the spin axis is going to tilt more, so we need to launch the golf ball wider from the target. When we hit going down to our wedges, we want the face to be closer to our target line. Right, so but the thing is, when you can get a player to have that face between face and path, between path and target line, and he can hit the sweet spot, they are going to be a pretty good golfer. Right, so we can also see for every degree of spin axis tilt, the ball will curve about just slightly below 1 yard at every 100 yards. Right, now again, we've looked at the effects of an off-center hit on spin and launch on the club face. Let's have a look at the spin axis tilt due to an off-center hit. We can see it's quite severe when you do hit drivers due to the fact that the center of gravity is moved slightly more back, higher torque in the shaft, a bigger face, so there's a lot more twisting involved. Right, so we can see 5.5 degrees for every small dimple that you miss the sweet spot. And again, could be a little lower with a lower swing speed, could be a little higher with a higher swing speed. With an iron, it's a little less due to the fact that we have much less torque, and the CG is right behind the face, so it's only 2 degrees. Right, so with irons, you can still get away with missing the sweet spot. Your ball flight's not going to change too much. With a driver, it could have a bigger effect. Right, the toe hit will tilt the spin axis to the left, and impact to the heel will tilt it to the right. Now, and that's why club manufacturers build club heads, driver heads with bulge and roll, is to minimize that effect, but that is also limited. Right, so let's have a look at it. 250 yards with an impact position, a dimple off the sweet spot will miss its intended target by 12 yards. Right, with an iron, it's only 2.5 yards. So you can see how important it is to hit the sweet spot, especially with your driver. Right, so let's have a look at another example, and I'm going to take this exact same example as we worked on with the fitting, but I'm going to add the face and path to it as well. Right, so we've got that same club delivery parameter, 90 miles an hour, ball speed 135, club path, let's say it's a good club path, 3 degrees inside out, face is dead square. At impact, the golf ball is going to launch about 1/2 degree to the right. The face to path will be 3 degrees closed. That will tilt the spin axis 15 degrees due to the fact that I have 14 degrees of spin loft, and my spin rate and launch angles is the same as we've seen just now. So that golf ball, as we said, was 202 yards of carry, but it missed the target by 25 yards. So the guy squared up, made a 3 degree inside out swing. He had his face dead square at impact, and that golf ball ends up in the rough. Right, so what are we going to do? So we've improved these launch conditions with the dynamic loft and the angle of attack change. What we're going to do now is we're going to focus on that face, because we're pretty happy with that path. That's a pretty good path for somebody that wants to hit a nice little draw. So we need to get that face 2 degrees open. Getting that 2 degrees open will get us the golf balls to launch a little wider. So went from 1/2 degree to 2.2 degrees open. And the spin axis, since we only have a degree face to path and a degree closed, that spin axis is now going to tilt 5 degrees instead of 15 degrees. Right, so much more controllable ball flight. And that is by changing the face only 2 degrees. Right, and there's a myriad of options out there for you as teachers to change that. We're not going to tell you how to open the face 2 degrees. We're just giving you, a tool that will give you immediate feedback. Right, and that will give us a 218 yards right on the target. So, angle of attack nice and up, dynamic loft 2 degrees down, and face angle 2 degrees open gave this guy quite some good results. Right, next up, let's have a look at using radar in benchmarking your students. Right, so what we have is we have an app called FlightScope Skills. It's only $10. Anybody can download it, free to download it. So you can have your students download it You can include it in a lesson package, and that will give them access to their own app where they can use the FlightScope to practice and benchmark themselves on. Right, so the FlightScope Combine consists of 28 virtual targets with a 30-minute time limit. The targets range from 20 yards to 240 yards, and for each and every swing, we'll have the data parameters displayed. So you'll have the ball parameters from that 20 yards up to the 240, and you'll have the club data available on your, more closer to the 100-yard point up to 240. Right, the scoring, we've got a point score and also a proximity from the target score, and that is what we'll use to score this player that will ultimately be used to benchmark himself against other players. Right, we use the PGA Tour, the latest PGA Tour ShotLink stats as a baseline to tell players where their strengths and weaknesses are. Right, so the Combine also creates a great opportunity for you to create a pressure environment to where you can validate a fitting. So, somebody might hit that new driver beautifully on the range, but once he gets onto the onto the golf course, he starts slicing it. Right, so everybody's changing their amateurs do tend to change their swings from range to the course as soon as you introduce pressure. So again, the Combine can create that pressure for you in the teaching bay. Right. Combine also allows the teacher to collect data while playing mimics player conditions. So somebody might have, and I'm a good example of that, when on the range, my path is about 4 degrees right. As soon as I get onto the golf course, I'm pushing all my drive because now my path is actually to the left. So my open face works beautifully with my inside path, but not so much with that left path. So it's also a nice way for you to see, what does a player do with his deep plane when you do introduce pressure to his swing. Right. Also, the Combine is a great practice tool. It can create that environment where a player can achieve repetition that resembles actual game pressure or game environment. So to maximize, get into focus and maximize his effectiveness of his practice session. So, I don't know if anybody reads or have read the talent code, but they say you've got to repeat yourself. You've got to get that repetition in a game-like environment. Repetition on the range, a little less effective. Right, and then the Combine scores is available online, so you can review it. Your players can review it at any time. Also, from a training standpoint, once you've done the Combine, you can create your own custom challenges or combines. Your player can create his own challenges, or you can create homework for them, an assignment, and you can basically, just keep track on how they're practicing and whether they're improving. It's also a fun way for them to practice and also compete. So you can, introduce your own skills shootout at the facility where, up to 4 players can compete head-to-head and eliminate each other, and maybe you can have a free lesson at the end of the day, or you can introduce money and $20 to compete, and the winner gets a dozen golf balls or whatever. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly show you how I would use the Combine. All right, so there we go. All right, so this is my FlightScope Combine, and you can see on the right there is all my scorecards that I've played so I can view them at any time. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to create a combine. I can choose a complete combine, and you can see that those are the listed targets. So there's 28 targets, a 345 maximum score, and we can start our game. So it will tell you what your target is, width, distance, and also the amount of points available, and you will be able to then play your targets. Right, at the bottom we have all our parameters. So pretty much it looks like this when you're done. Right, so after we've done the combine, we'll give you this little report that's going to tell you how you fared against average PGA Tour player on those distances. So this is a great way where I can see where we need to work on. So, you know, at 50 yards and less, this guy's not very good. So the field shots is something that I would want to work on. He's 100 to 125 is pretty strong, as is his, driver, or his tee shots from 200 plus. He's pretty good as well. Those are the strengths. So it lines up nicely. We're working on course strategy. We make sure that he tees off, that he leaves himself 100 to 125 yards in. That will give him the best opportunities to, focus on his strengths. Right, we're also going to give you your driving accuracy, so your fairway hit percentage, where your tendencies are to miss. So in this case, 18% towards will miss the fairway left, 80% of the shots. Greens in regulation, 79, which is pretty good, with short being the culprit. And then we also have a nice little report at the bottom that will tell us what is his favorite shot shape. So a little draw is what he's pretty much worked on, or like to do. All right, so we can also change the view. So I can change and focus on any one of these targets that we played. So let's look at a good one. So there's target 10. You can view the shot plots. So I can go and I can review somebody's combine and see exactly what they did. And at the bottom, we've got all the data available. So angle of attack, face angle, dynamic lock, club path. So again, club path 4 inside out, face 2. So we've got that 2-to-1 ratio that we're looking for. Right. We can also view the shot stats. So all the shot stats are available. Spin vectors, face and path, angle of attack, and dynamic locked. So once we've done this, I can tell my student this is what we need to work on to make you or improve you as a golfer. So now I can actually create a training regimen for him, and I'm going to build a custom combine for him. So we can build a custom combine. You can choose the amount of targets, whether you want these targets to be displayed randomly or sequentially. And once we've done that, it will be saved to your playbook. And we can see there's all my little games that I've created, and this one, Field Shots, is the one that I created for him. So you can see I created 4 targets with a 30 yard, a 40 yard, a 50 yard, and I mixed it up with the 4th one at 67 yards. So I'm going to give him this game to play, and like I said, you can have up to 4 guys competing at the same time. So I'm going to give him this to play. This will be his homework. Now he could use your, like I said, he can download the app himself. He can use your FlightScope at a rental fee. We're also introducing a smaller version of our FlightScope next year that will be aimed at the consumer, to where you can include the rental of a system in a lesson package, or you can sell them the system, but it will give them the ability to practice these custom training games that you've set up for them at their own leisure, and you can view and track their results online to make sure that they stay on track. Right, so that is pretty much the technology in a nutshell. and how I feel it can help you as a teacher to be, make more money by offering more services, but also help improve your students at a faster rate. Any questions?
How much are they? Of flight school?
The X2 system, we have a special at the moment running, it's $10,000 US. The consumer model will be quite a bit less, and hopefully we can get it to a very low number to make it accessible. Yes?
You were talking with the driver in at some point, talking about the bottom of the club going faster than the top of the club.
Yes.
Could you speak a little bit more about that? Is that to do with shaft flex? Does that have to do with?
Yes, absolutely. The way that the shaft bows back delivers the club this way. If you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And that movement causes the bottom of the face to move faster than the top, and the toe to move faster than the heel.
How does that relate to like the impact marks? Like what do you see with most of the tour level players? Are they hitting it above the sweet spot?
Above.
Are they hitting it on? Or are they
On or above. On or above.
How about your your slower swing speed players? What are you looking for in those players?
There's two ways to get, like I said, what we're trying to achieve is we're trying to achieve a higher launch angle and a lower spin rate. There's two ways to achieve that. Either move your impact position towards the top of the face, or to increase your angle of attack and lower your loft. Right, so the only drawback is, let's say the pros of moving the impact position is that you can actually hit the ball with a negative angle of attack. So not change the swing from saying 5 degrees negative with the irons, and you get into you tee off with 5 degrees positive. When you hit your drive iron, you've got to hit 5 degrees negative. So you can use a more similar swing, if I can call it that. But you're losing a little bit of ball speed. So to maximize that effect, the best would be to hit it in the sweet spot and actually change your angle of attack positive and de-loft the driver more. That would be the best option scientifically, but it could not be for your student that might find it too difficult. I mean, I've talked to some tour players that tried to change their angle of attack on the driver about 2 degrees and lost the season because of that. So if a player does not have that ability or he finds it tougher, then you might work on something to get them to get that impact, maybe a little bit higher tee height or whatever.
Does that change? So if you're having this more positive angle of attack, will they hit more on the bottom of the club? What's the optimal way to get it above that sweet spot?
To get the impact above the sweet spot?
Yeah.
I would just say a higher tee position is the easiest. Yeah.
Talking about your half the face relationship, that
Yes.
50%, does it ever become too much? For example, a 14-7 differential or 10-5 or something like that? And what is face rotation? What does that affect?
Sorry, just ask the first part of your question again.
You were talking about the 50% face to path relationship, the optimum in to out relationship.
Yes.
Does that ever get to be too much? For example, they get a 10-degree into out path or a 14-degree into up path, which I've seen on occasion, where they get that relationship become too much to be able to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think talking to Chuck Cook, for example, he said he and Jason tries to work on keeping the path to within 2.5 degrees of the target line. Like I said, when you're moving, in the 8-9 degree range, like a Bubba Watson or Kenny Perry, the face is going to be quite a bit open. Plus, you're going to get a lot of spin axis tilt, which makes it tougher to play in the wind, and also brings in a lot of more timing issues. I think clubs are, especially for amateur golfers, equipment manufacturers design clubs to be square. So didn't get that path close to the target line, you are going to have less spin axis tilt due to the face and the path not being in the right relationship. You understand what I'm saying?
Mhm. No,
So,
exactly. Yeah,
so if you leave the face open at 10 degrees inside out, that golf ball is going to miss.
No, that's what I've seen with the best players that have come in under, the measurements I've seen have been 2 to 4 degrees in downtown.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
really is there because it's
Yeah,
easier to time.
baby draws,
the ball,
baby
you know.
fades.
And also the ball dispersion and their spin rates of this amazing, how much better they can.
So what was the second?
The second one's the phase rotation in relationship.
Face
In other words,
rotation
if you
does have an
have-
influence, absolutely. Again, we're working a little bit of research on that. Again, it varies on speed, but I think it doesn't tilt a lot more than 2 degrees. If you have a zero face, zero path, with normal face rotation, it's not going to tilt more than 2 degrees. So it does have an effect, well, 2 degrees to the right. Does have an effect, but not as much that I think it's going to make a huge difference.
The only concern I have on that particular case is a player who has a slow swing speed, maybe 75 miles as a driver, and they're getting the 6 degree in to out, and got a 3 degree open.
Yeah,
They have trouble getting that.
Yeah, absolutely. When you do have, especially when you do have lower spin loft, less vertical gear effect, less compression, it's going to influence it more.
Right. Okay, any other questions? All right, we'll be handing out the quiz that you need to fill out successfully to get your MSR points here before lunch. So, but again, that's awesome, David. We could use you for, I think, 4 or 5 or 6 hours to really get the heart of this. But we thank you very much for, again, making a long trip out here. Thank you.